What makes a great sales leader? What do they do to keep their sellers motivated and engaged? And how do they create a culture that contributes to success? As the head of enterprise sales at Slack, Dannie Herzberg oversees the company's enterprise and commercial sales organizations, which includes 15 leaders and teams spanning 6 geographies across the Americas. Kim Graves is the director of sales at Slack, where she guides the teams working with the most innovative SMB and mid-market organizations. Dannie and Kim have worked together to build a successful sales operation and playbook at Slack, and have designed blueprints for success that sales managers at companies of any size can learn from. They're here today to share their sales leadership philosophies and the practical steps that will ensure your team's success and your business's growth. Joined now by Nutshell's VP of Customer Experience, Catherine Mays, it is my pleasure to welcome to the Boundless main stage, Dannie Herzberg and Kim Graves.
Hi, good morning. So good to see you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you so much to our audience for being here. I'm so excited for this chat. We've got a bunch of really good topics. So I'm going to kick it off with something I've just been dying to hear about. Was there a moment or a time when you first realized that Slack was going to be huge?
There were many moments. I would say the first moment was quite literal for me to set the stage. It was in 2014 when I first started working at Slack. Back then, I was in our Vancouver office. There was only 12 of us, including our CEO, and we were working in this 800 square foot office. Very minimal, no kitchen, no restroom, no meeting rooms. If you had to take a meeting, you'd go outside and hunch over your laptop in the hallway that was communal. So you get the picture. It's very, very humble. And it was 1 month into working there. It was a special day. We knew that we were going to be in the news, and our CEO, Stuart, was going to be in the news. And so we rolled in the TV to all watch him. And he started talking about our latest round of funding. And I remember at the bottom of the TV, the headline was $1 billion startup. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, okay, like this thing that I just joined is bigger than I originally imagined. And there's been many moments after that where the vision has just kept on getting larger and larger.
Wow, that's amazing. Dannie, what about you? Did you have a similar moment?
I did. So Kim's point of pride is like, Kim was one of the people who actually made it, even that first $1 billion startup. She was there from the very, very early days. I came when Slack was, sales was in its earliest days, but the company was already taking off thanks to Kim and lots of people who started it with her. My moment was, I think it was right around when I got the offer, but I hadn't started yet. And this is silly, but I walked into a Casper mattress pop-up store, and the women at the front desk had just like MacBooks up. It was pretty casual. They had Slack stickers on the MacBook. And coming from enterprise software previously, I was like, this is not a badge of honor you usually just put on a computer like that, unless it's your own company brand. So that really sunk in. And then I went to a wedding of one of my husband's closest childhood friends. I told the rabbi who officiated the wedding where I was going to be working, assuming that, it would fall on deaf ears or it wouldn't be particularly relevant. And he immediately told me he was in a Slack group with a minister and a priest, and they exchanged notes on liturgy together, which I just thought was incredible. And so like, it's not like, yeah, I knew this was going to be, this product-led growth company doing XYZ. What I knew was consumerization of the enterprise was not just a buzzword, but it was a real thing taking off, where when people can connect to a brand and feel really proud and loyal of it, and if you're building an enterprise company, but there's some consumer use case, even if that's not the focus of the business, you just spread all of this brand awareness, and you can tell the company's going to be big. And then for me personally, in my career, I could tell I was going to be really proud to tell people I work at Slack and want to talk about it even outside of work. So those were kind of my silly moments.
Wow, those are incredible stories. I imagine you must feel so proud, and it has been probably such an incredible journey. So yeah, to kind of move on to the topic of this session, I'm just geeking out, fangirling, talking to you both. Danny, you're head of enterprise sales. Kim, you're director of sales. And we don't often think about this, but even globally recognized, seemingly ubiquitous brands need a sales team to keep the engine running. So I'm curious to hear what it is you actually do and kind of what your day-to-day looks like.
I can kick that off. I think 3 big categories, and what may not be obvious is they're somewhat seasonal. So right now it's the beginning of our fiscal year. So you spend your time on slightly different activities than the last month of someone's fiscal year, where it kind of is just everyone all hands on deck trying to sell, and there's all this momentum. This is more like reflective, strategic look ahead. The categories I would say are people. Any leadership role, especially a sales leadership role, is all about figuring out how do you tap into your people's motivation? How do you hire the right people? How do you groom the right people to stretch and grow? The other part is strategy and operations. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the other part is selling, obviously. So people-wise, I would say like that's part's not seasonal. That's a constant. That's not relegated to performance reviews or something else. None of this works if you don't have a team that is motivated to spread the gospel of whatever it is you're selling. And the tricky part is no 2 people are motivated in the same way, and people at different stages of their careers are motivated by different things. So I know Kim does this too. We spend a lot of our energy thinking about who's on the team and what they care about, just their values as people, not just as professionals, and how we connect the dots between the mission that we're all working toward and what matters to us on a personal level. And part of managing people is also like keeping them informed. How do you make sure they're not blindsided? How do you make sure that you've repeated yourself enough times that everyone's on the same page and there's clarity? Strategy and operations actually flows nicely from that. Strategy is what are the 2, 3 max things that I'm going to do in a given quarter or year that are going to set us up for success? And a lot of that is thinking on your own and then thinking with other leaders about what are you going to say no to? What are you going to double down on? What does that require you to do? And then the third part is selling. And one part of selling is actually internal as a leader. So like, let's say Kim and I have our big 3 things, and we know that's what's going to set up our year for success. And building sales pipeline or prospecting is one of those. We have to do a little bit of internal selling to figure out, okay, how do we get the resources to set our particular organizations up for success? And then the core part of selling is obviously the fun stuff, which is getting to know your customers, coming in, understanding how to match what you sell, if you can, the business needs that they actually have, and developing those relationships for the long term.
Yeah, wow, that's great. So I'd love to hear what it is that drew you to your careers in sales leadership. What were your first sales management roles, and what were some of your early lessons?
My first sales management role was at Slack. It was in 2015. And what drew me to it was back then, everyone kind of chipped in and did everything. And I gravitated towards some of the managerial tasks, like organizing our team meetings and getting everyone aligned and on the same page, or figuring out our onboarding program and ramping up my peers and making sure that they're set up for success. And so when a management opportunity opened, it just felt natural to step into it. And at that time, that was managing our SMB sales team. I was managing 4 people. And the thing that I quickly had to ramp up on was, how do I hire quickly and hire really good people to help us get to our goals? And that's been, I'd say, like the biggest lesson and the evolving lesson. Hiring great people goes so much further than just who does the best pitch or who does the best demo in the interview. And a lot of my hiring, I've learned from Dannie and watching her. And I would say the biggest thing is not just who can do the job, but also who can learn and evolve as we adapt our sales playbooks. And in that, I learned a tactic from Dannie, which is in the interview, ask the interviewee to do a role play. So I'll say, hey, let's do a 2-minute role play. Give me an objection that you commonly hear from customers. I'll get that. And then I'll say, hey, I'll be the customer, you be the account executive. Let's play that out. And then after the 2 minutes, I'll give a little feedback like, hey, instead of asking this closed-ended question, how can you make that more open? Or how about starting with this? And then we'll do that again, and I'll see how they applied their learning. And that's been a really great way to test for it. So it's picking up these different things and learning how do we build a team that gels together and is all rallying towards the same goal.
Oh, that's excellent. That's a really good trick, and hopefully something that a lot of our viewers today will copy. Hopefully that's an awesome thing to do. So what are some of your big picture goals, and how do you organize your team's efforts around achieving them?
I can take that. Can I add to Kim's last answer, by the way? Because she's really humble, which is one of the things that I think draws someone to a sales leader. But we do a culture survey at least once a year. Like we do our big one once a year. And what I noticed in reading the reviews from Kim's team, I teared up reading them and DM'd her afterward on Slack. But the people on her team want to perform in part to make her proud and to work for something bigger than themselves. So I think just like in looking at what a great sales leader looks like, I look at Kim all the time, and I've literally asked her after that to spend an hour with me to teach me what she does and how she gets this kind of loyalty and presents herself. And some of it is just very authentic in her. But I don't know, there's something about, there's a concept of managing down, managing up, or managing across. To me, a sales leader who manages down in particularly is a really, really good one, because you have a connection with the people who are actually doing the selling, and you are motivating them to outperform. So that feels really, really important if someone is stepping in. It's not like, how do I look good in front of my boss? How do I make sure that all my metrics look ideal? It's like, how do my people step up and chant my name and want to do something bigger than themselves for me? Anyway, that wasn't your question, Catherine. Your question was around big picture goals, organizing team efforts. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Big picture goals. So Kim and I do this together right around now. Actually, we'll do at least 2 offsites a year with the leadership team. And I think as a leader, you need to come in with your own perspective around what big picture goals are. And those are largely going to be metrics oriented, especially in sales. It's going to be really clear, like we're going to achieve this in revenue this year. And here are some ways that we're going to track that, or this is the type of revenue that we really want to focus on if someone is doing services plus software or something else. The interesting part to me is the how you're going to get there and what challenges you anticipate along the way so that you can preempt those and work through them together. So the question that we usually ask ourselves is, what will it take to win this year? And the idea, especially at a fast growing company, is like every year you're a different company. So what will it take to win this year as opposed to what it took to win last year? And we brainstorm that together, and then we try to fine tune it to ideally 2 big buckets. And then we try to look around the corner and we're like, okay, what could be really hard about that path? And how do we have a really memorable and concise way to rally the troops to know that we're going to execute along this particular path? So it's brainstorming, it's collaborating, it's fine tuning and narrowing down to 2 big things usually. And then it's lots and lots and lots of repetition and operationalizing whatever you just decided into the way that you structure team meetings or celebrate or set up spiffs or performance bonuses or something like that.
Nice. And is that kind of when some of the internal selling that you were talking about earlier comes into play, getting all that into action?
Yeah. So let's say breaking into brand new accounts is an example of like a priority. So if we say, okay, we did a great job with expansion revenue last year. Once we land a customer, we really know how to grow the depth of that engagement and broaden it. But we still need to break into someone new. Internal selling would probably be me spending a lot of time with operations and our head of sales development saying, okay, for our org, we really need to break in. Is there how can we best align the BDR team to our organization to make sure that we're set up for success there? So you're not like schmoozy sales, like you're not pulling the wool over someone's eyes, especially internally at your own company, but you are sharing what your priorities are and connecting the why for your organization to whatever you're going to ask of them.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. So I'd like to hear what role you think the ideal manager plays in setting professional goals with your team members. So maybe taking it down a notch from big picture goals and helping your team members kind of establish their own professional goals.
I can take a stab at that first. So I have this saying, it's the manager can play 49%, the employee needs to play at least 51% of setting those goals for their own profession and their own careers. And part of it is just making time for the conversation. Sales is so go, go, go. There's always a customer to talk to or a deal to do. And so it's really hard to just take a step back and make sure that we have that conversation and those checkpoints. And so at Slack, on my team, we do that twice a year. And it's a chance for your team member to reflect on what are they proud of, what gave them energy, what's something that when they look back, they would have done differently. And then it's almost like I'm playing the account executive, where I'm doing discovery then, trying to understand, okay, like tell me more about that to help them reflect. And then we can craft what their next professional goal looks like together. And I always like to end with, how can I support you? What would you like to see from me? And how can I hold you accountable to getting there?
Nice. You actually answered kind of a question I had, which was, is it mostly proactive and coming from you in terms of establishing those goals, or is it mostly coming from the team member? That's great. Danny, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
For anyone who's on the phone who is a sales leader or a company leader, period, I would say, think of this as a moment that will probably be one of your highlight interactions with an employee through the year. Like, to me, these conversations go really deep. You always book an hour, not a half hour. It's not transactional. It's like Kim was saying, you're understanding the why behind it. So it's something to look forward to. And then I would name it in the calendar as something separate than a one-on-one. That's kind of small and logistical, but it's kind of like a reminder to carve out space for a different type of conversation. So that's it. And it's not a monthly thing. The more junior someone is, the more they're going to want to do it monthly. And the more transactional it may sound more like, okay, just checking in. What will it take for me to become a senior account executive by next quarter? And what you really want to say is like, here's how I want to grow in my career. I want to check in and see if I have any blind spots that we should talk through. And then, and someone may also want to ask me or Kim, like, how are you thinking about it? A lot of time we get that question. And I think it's on us to be really open on that front as well, because that makes the bond deeper.
Yeah, great. So to follow up on the previous question, how do the two of you think about goal setting for yourselves, and how often do you revisit your goals, and what do you do to keep yourselves accountable?
Yeah, to Danny's point, it's changed a lot over time. Like in the beginning, it was very much, how do I close the next deal? How do I close my first six-figure deal? Or how do I get the senior account manager? And And over time, it's become a lot more ambiguous as I've become more senior in my career. It's Danny who taught me to ask myself the question, how do I want to spend my time in the next year? What do I want to be doing? And last year, Danny encouraged me to do a lot of self-reflection. And that's when I got an external coach who taught me about the framework be, do, have. And so what she said is, think about who do you want to be next year? What do you want to be doing? And what do you want to have? And some of the answers that I gave to her were, well, I want to be a leader at Slack. I want to continue being a leader. I really want to do something that's cross-functional and has cross-functional impact. And I want to have a great manager. And I want to, back then, this was an interesting one, I wanted to live in a different city. And so I formalized that. I put it in writing. I shared my document with Danny. And it was great. Danny encouraged me to go have some exploratory conversations. And so I met with our product leaders, some of our marketing leaders, sales. And it was a great way for me to understand, okay, what do different departments do? What are the opportunities? What does Slack need for the next year? And the funny thing is that after doing all of that, I landed right back where I am, which is sales. But even though I landed right back here, like, it felt so much more intentional that this was the career path I was carving for myself. And here's the vision that I have for the next year. And Danny played a big role in making that happen.
Wow, that's great. That's so funny that sometimes it just comes full circle like that.
That's a really hard one, I think, in leadership for all of us. Like, although I want to work with Kim every day forever, I would be hurting myself and our relationship if I was kind of like holding on for dear life and limiting her in that conversation. And so I think, in part, being a leader is all about thinking in the long term. You're thinking bigger picture, what's around the corner for our company and what should we anticipate, even if it's not right in front of us. But even for the people on your team, you really can't be a limiter in their career. So the goals conversation has to be one that's a safe zone where they get to say, the thing I want to do is not just the thing that makes your life directly easier at work every single day. And I personally feel like I have to earn every employee's keep every year. I don't, if someone gets a call from a recruiter, I don't find that offensive if they take the call, for example. I think my job is to make the job enough of a stretch and fun enough and fulfilling enough that they want to stick around. So that's it. And the only other thing I would add is what's worked well, and this is almost more me and my husband setting goals and being reflective for our own personal lives, and professional is a really big part of our identities as it fits in, is like, if you can connect goal setting to some other marker that's going to happen no matter what. So New Year's Eve or like a holiday break is often a good time if you want to add personal to it. Then you can have, first of all, you have this like time capsule every year that is showing either consistency in your values or what's evolving. And you can think about, your life a little bit more holistically and how everything fits in. And the more you write it down, the more likely it's going to happen.
That's great. Yeah, you both mentioned writing it down being so important. And I think that's something that I'm going to take away, is doing a better job of actually putting some of my own goals in writing. And so my next question, you've kind of already hinted at this a lot. You've talked about just the way that you're speaking. It's really clear about what some of your values are: strong relationships internally, transparency, trust, which is great. So inspiring to see happening in real time just between the two of you. So I'm curious to hear how you think about motivating your team members and how building a culture plays a role in that.
Culture plays a big role in that. To Danny's point earlier, like, everyone's motivated by different things. So it's understanding what makes that particular person tick. But beyond that, like, it's the team that gels, and it's the environment that can also be really motivating. And so a few years ago, Slack brought in an external speaker. Her name's Lindsay McGregor, and she's a researcher on total motivation. And I was playing around with figuring out how to motivate my team, but I think she really crystallized it the best for me, because she categorized the 3 most powerful motivators in the workplace: purpose, potential, and play. Purpose is, how are you making an impact? Potential is, how are you growing your career? And play is, like, are you enjoying what you're doing? And so she talked about how can you incorporate purpose, play, potential more into the team environment and team meetings, team huddles, just on the sales floor. And one of the tactics I took away from her is asking big, meaty questions back to your team in team meetings. As an example, what's something that you're strategically working towards now? I think a lot of the time it's, how do we build more pipeline? And so she phrased it in terms of, how might we double our pipeline in the next 2 months? And she encouraged leaders to throw those questions back to their team, so that as a collective, we could brainstorm and figure out, okay, maybe we could run a campaign, or there were some, when I actually did throw this question, there were some very analytical people on my team. And so they were like, well, how about we measure the conversion rate and historical numbers and figure out how to work backwards? And it was great, because that just naturally got everyone going in the same direction of, okay, we're on a path to doubling pipeline. And then you elicited all of these different strengths and ideas. And then at the end of that brainstorm, we would decide on 1 or 2 experiments that we actually wanted to commit to. And then we'd decide the period of time. And then we would do it, and then we would all learn and to figure out, okay, what worked, what didn't work, how can we iterate on that to keep going down this path of doubling pipeline. And so going back to purpose, potential, and play, it was great because the purpose, the impact was clear. People were figuring out, okay, what are their strengths and how could they contribute? And then it was just fun figuring out, how can we do this in a new creative way? So that's something that was tactical. I'd say just creating an enjoyable environment goes such a long way too. One of our SMB leaders this past quarter did a wonderful job of motivating their team. He set a bet where if the team surpassed their best case target, then he would jump in Lake Ontario. And for everyone here, like, Lake Ontario is freezing at this time of year. And I'm not sure if this is the same term in the US, but in Canada, we call it a polar bear day. And like, just seeing the team rally all throughout the quarter, like trying to get their manager to jump in, like, it was so fun. And they did it. Like, this was, I kid you not, a really bullish goal, and they did it. And 2 days ago, he jumped in Lake Ontario. So yeah, and a playful example of how to motivate.
Wow. Yeah. The Midwest, that whole area right now is covered in snow and freezing cold. So I can imagine how fun that was. I hope that that's on film for your whole team to enjoy.
It is. It's going down in the Slack sales history books.
All right. So what are some of the key traits and skills that you look for in a sales manager? And do you have any guidance that you share with newer team members who might be interested in leadership roles?
Do you want to kick that off, Kim?
Yeah, sure. So guidance for people looking at management, I would say it's the shift in mindset. It's shifting the mindset to what's the best thing we can do for the company? What's the best thing we can do for the team over self? And so it's people who are already shifting to that mindset, and actions speak louder than words. So it's people who are investing in their peers' deals, investing in the team culture. And especially when it comes to change management, as Danny mentioned, we're at the beginning of our fiscal year. There's a lot of change management going on, like new comp plan or new territory. And so it's those people who can see the bigger picture of why we've made these strategic decisions and are helping their peers get on board. And if that's something that they like and they enjoy doing and they get more fulfillment out of doing that over working with their own individual customers and own individual deals, I'd say like continue exploring that path.
Yeah. And anyone who's on here, so I don't know what the audience mix is, but let's say there's someone on here who's never been in leadership but aspires to be. To that person, I would say express it as a potential interest early, kind of plant that seed. And if there's an opportunity to interview even before you're ready, because it's good exposure, it's good practice. You try it on for size and you see, like, am I genuinely connecting to this? And it's a chance to get feedback and set yourself up for success when you really, really do want it. So for the leaders or business owners in the room, I would encourage other people to stretch into it or try it on. Mm-hmm. And then Kim and I have been talking, I feel like every year when we're hiring leaders, there's something different about the nature of Slack or what we're looking for. Like I said, we're a different company at minimum every year, but sometimes it feels like every 6 months. We're just growing that fast. So it's not like here are the static traits of a leader. We have a ever-changing, like every year there's a changing scorecard officially where we write down how are we going to evaluate someone as a leader. But we also just have conversations about like what's going to be hard this year and what do we need a leader to be able to absorb or perpetuate. So some years it's been we need a leader who's going to get on the first plane and get in the trenches with reps and be selling and getting into territory and trying on this new sale for size. This is probably not the year of leaders who get on the plane being a number one priority. But this year and last year, we didn't know this at the time, but would have been more about change management, like Kim said. So it's like what leaders absorb the shock of changes, what leaders are naturally being cheerleaders and rallying the troops, because that's what's needed from the company at a given point in time. So just really ask yourself, what do we need over the next 1 to 2 years? And how do we look for that and so on?
Yeah, that's great advice. So I want to hear about the best leader that you've ever had, and what was it that made them great? And did you learn anything from them that you're still thinking about today?
Well, that's awkward because she's sitting right here. You'll hear a lot of Danny's perspective. So I'll choose a different person. But what I will say about Danny is she doesn't just talk the talk, but she walks the walk. So what I mean by that is she role models what good looks like. And I think the biggest thing that I've taken away from reporting to Danny, I should have started with this. I've reported to Danny over the last 3 years. It wasn't until last month where Danny moved on to lead our enterprise team. And so what I learned from Danny over the last 3 years is I just watch her in meetings, internal customer meetings or in interviews, and I pick up on the way that she phrases her questions or how she thinks about strategy. And that's the big, like, just absorbing it and shadowing her is probably what I've taken away the most. But I'll also talk about another leader. One of my first leaders when I joined Slack was, his name's James. And the best thing about James is he just had the utmost belief in me. And I could just like feel how much he cared about my career and my success. And he would state that. And at the time, like, that is what I needed most because I felt out of my depth. And I remember our last one-on-one together before he moved on and took over the EMEA sales team at Slack. I asked him for advice. And the advice was so simple. It was actually a Winnie the Pooh quote, funny enough. And all he said was, Kim, you're smarter than you think and you're braver than you feel. And like, at the time I was like, okay. But over the years, like, that quote has just stuck with me because what it meant to me is like, I already have what it takes. I just have to look inside myself and like believe in it. And then it was just so motivating. So I was like, okay, like, I can do this. Like, I want to keep contributing to the company, to the team. Like, and yeah, I've noticed that in reading my manager's performance reviews this latest cycle, that goes such a long way, creating that trust and that safety, as well as just like knowing that your manager genuinely cares about you, goes so far.
Yeah, and I already hinted at this, but I would say that we should all be learning from people even beyond the people we report to. So, and there are countless times that I call Kim, for example, even when we had direct line reporting structure, and I'll just say like, I screwed up that meeting, or I was, for whatever the reason is, I'm like, that was off. Did you feel it? What would you have done here? And so I think a really important element of leadership is realizing that you can go to anyone for advice whose opinion you really trust, and there are probably different people for different types of topics. Personally, in terms of what a good leader looks like, I want someone who is extremely direct with me. So if someone said something like, hey, I would expect you to know that by now, or, the way you showed up was X, I would take that as the greatest compliment. And the more I get of that, the more I assume they think I'm worth giving constructive feedback to. So that's my dream scenario. And then what you want in a leader kind of just changes depending on where you are in your career, how hands-on or hands-off they could be. I can give you the flip side of the not ideal experiences too.
Yeah. So we're running a little low on time. I want to change gears here and move to some audience questions because we've had some really good questions coming in from our viewers. So Emma says, you two are amazing. I'm inspired by the culture you have cultivated. In the early days of Slack, how did you structure your team to turn consumer customers into business clients?
Well, I'm wondering thank you, Emma, that's really nice. And can you tell that we like working together? I'm worried that my examples of how I knew Slack was going to be big implied that we just take consumers and turn them into enterprise clients. There are going to be some people who use Slack for fantasy football league, and that's all they do, and we don't need to turn them into business clients. What I was saying is really special is when you have this, actually the design of your product is so well thought out and lovable and intuitive that it almost has a consumer-like feel, just like an iPhone would have or something else. But it's used in the enterprise context. And I think most of us are historically used to using like clunky enterprise solutions that are probably super high security and good for whoever up top is managing it, but like not really lovable or pleasant as the end user. They don't unlock some joy in your day. And so I was just kind of trying to connect those two worlds together. But I actually think it's really important to decide whether you are building a consumer business or an enterprise business. So if I look at Dropbox, that's a company that struggled on this front. You can use Dropbox to share your family photos with your inner circle. You can also use Dropbox to share secure files within an organization. I think this is my perception from the outside. The company took a long time to make a bet on which was their core focus and identity. Are we a consumer company or are we an enterprise company? And part of the appeal of joining Slack, which has paid off manyfold, is the CEO is crystal clear. We are a B2B enterprise company. Doesn't mean you can't use Slack or gain awareness of Slack through other use cases, but his time, his energy, his team building is all spent on figuring out how to service businesses with our product. So I would actually spend your time making the hard choice of which do you want to be and what are you going to say no to, and then understand if you choose enterprise, look for some of that surprise and delight, like design-oriented lovability that comes with consumer products.
Oh, yeah, that's really helpful and kind of gets to the product market fit aspect, which you've had a couple of questions about. I'm going to ask another question from David. He's wondering if you have any experiences or techniques you can share when an employee's career, ambition, and ability is running ahead of what the company can offer.
Yeah, it always comes down to what the business needs and being ready for it. And as we've talked about, if you're already ready for it, like start doing a great job of both roles so that when that opportunity does come, you're there, and it's when opportunity meets preparation. And so, and like at Slack, I find I have been able to point to other examples of like, hey, like these people already started doing the job. And so that when the opportunity came in like maybe a year, maybe 2 years, like they were able to step into it. And so that is a hard question. And Danny, what would you add?
I would say that's a good one if you can, if you anticipate the company growing, you know, at a reasonable clip over the next couple of years. A lot of what you were saying earlier, Kim, about showing people your investment in them as humans, I think could pay off here, David. So what if, you know, there's not going to be the exact role for them or a fancy enough title for them over the next year and a half? If you care about them deeply, you probably have other people in their network that you want them to be mentored by who are like 5 steps ahead of them in their career, and you could connect them. Or a thing I think is really flattering and an opportunity for growth for people is actually introducing them to be mentors to someone outside of an organization. So I think doubling down on your investment in them as a person, and maybe even thinking outside of the company, how can you help that person's career grow or flourish, or their network get bigger? Like that could be a good way to spend your energy in those scenarios. I also wouldn't fake it. Like if someone says, I want to be a chief revenue officer and I want to be it here, and you're looking at your organization and you're like, okay, well, we already have the person in that seat. And then if I were to think through succession planning, we kind of have the next 2 obvious candidates. I wouldn't pretend it's at Slack. I would actually broaden and say, okay, chief revenue officer, what is it about that role? How are you spending your time? Let's think about it in and out of Slack. What would it take to get there? And then you can start creating stretch assignments within your organization that would set them up, perhaps even outside of it.
Yeah, cool. In these last few minutes, we have another really good question I'd like to ask from Richard. He wants to know, how do you balance both motivating your team while holding them accountable when things aren't going well? Kind of a tricky one.
I know Danny has a good answer to this.
I do. I would have said that's one of my struggles as a leader. Like this past year, one of my struggles was balancing empathy with accountability and figuring out when do I lean hard into one versus the other. Everyone's different on this front, so this is not like a right or one size fits all answer, but when I played sports in high school, if we lost a game, I wasn't a fan of the whole like silent bus ride home thing where you just sit and reflect like, you know, stupid, why did we lose? Like we can't have fun and play on the bus home. So I think give your reps or your team credit. They probably hold themselves accountable, and motivating them, like Kim said, when things are really down, motivating them probably means giving them a boost of confidence and reminding them that their inputs and attitude were in the right place, and then karma will play out soon. And then when things are going really well, that's when you can kind of push and stretch them more and say, you achieved this. I'm really proud of you. Frankly, I think you can achieve double within the next 6 months, knowing you. What's it going to take to stretch you there? That's what I'm counting on you for. So maybe just do kind of like the inverse of the situation and push when things are good, and kind of bear hug when things are a little harder.
That's a great answer and really empathetic. I love how much you've just demonstrated during this talk, how much both of you really do kind of walk the walk. Like it's clear that you're coming from a place of doing this every day. So unfortunately, Danny Herzberg, Kim Graves, that's all the time we have. So thank you so much for being with us today. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much for hosting us. This is a great event. Really honored.
Thank you, Catherine. Really enjoyed the discussion today.
Yeah, and thanks so much to our viewers for joining. Don't go anywhere. There are more expert sessions from Boundless 2021 just ahead. We'll see you soon. Stay tuned.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.